the 2023 Mayor's Public Policy Fellows. And congratulations to all of you for successfully completing your time here. Hopefully, this experience has given you a glimpse of what a life in public service might be like for you, and that you will join some of the rest of us in serving the public this way. The City of Seattle is always looking for good employees, so keep this in mind. It's my honor here this morning to introduce my boss, the Mayor of Seattle, Bruce Harrell, who will come up here as soon as he's done chatting with Ben and say a few remarks, and then we'll get right into your presentations. Mayor Harrell.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Oh, thank you. There, applause sign or something right on this? That was kind of you. Get my notes here. I'm only going to speak briefly because I'll say some closing remarks after these awesome presentations, right? I'm going to claim it into existence. Really honored to stand before you as the mayor, but more as someone that just significantly believes in change. And in a time where I think particularly the younger generation, they see so many contradictions in our society. Many more than I saw when I was younger. I mean, we always, as a young person, I was young once, believe it or not, that we saw the same kind of contradiction. I lived when I was coming out of high school and in college, an impeachment of a president, a very controversial war in the Vietnam War. I lived through the assassinations of the Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King, so we certainly saw incredible public events that changed the course of our lives and our value system. But what you see now, I think, continues to be incredible inconsistencies of incredible wealth, incredible poverty, health challenges, disparities. And so what I've been told by many of the people you're working around is that we truly have warriors and change agents as our fellows. So I want to say that it's really been a pleasure to having you participate in this innovative work. The 9 of you, I hope, had unique experiences that will help you to continue on in your journey. And as I said, I'll say some closing words, but I have to say that, this commitment to public service, it has to come from within. You could do other things in life. Yesterday I had to do one of the unfortunate things of speaking at someone's funeral. It was a friend of mine's mother, and when I go to events like that, it really tells me on this short time we're on earth, really how you spend your energy. The difference between people, I think, often is in their energy and in their creativity, and we have a finite span for that. So public service is something I cherish, and for you all to really think about a possibility of spending your talent in public service for that, I am blessed to have you to be part of our administration, and I hope that you learned something. So I look forward to hearing the presentations, and I'll turn it over to Sandra Wong, who I think will talk about the presentations and how we'll go about. So thank you very, very much. Okay.
Good morning. So my job today is kind of set the groundwork for how the presentations will be given today for you. We have 7 fellows in person today ready to give their 6-minute-ish presentation to you. We have 2 of the fellows who already have gone back to school or are on school projects who have pre-recorded their presentations that we will play at the end of our 7 in-person presentations here. Along with the PowerPoints that they will be giving today for you, they have also supplemented that with briefing papers. And if you would like to receive those briefing papers after this event, we could email it to you. And there's a sign-up sheet in the middle of the table where you could put your name and your email address, where I will share that with you, the link later. I want to stress that since it is 6 minutes-ish for each fellow's presentation, time is tight. And so I ask that you hold off on your questions until after they are done. After they're done, we could take 1 to 2 questions at that point, and then we'll be queuing up the next presentation after that. And if you have any further questions beyond that, you are welcome to email me, and I will get it to the right person to get that answered for you. Before we get started with the presentations, I want to do a quick check-out minute here to say it has been my honor and pleasure to work with all 9 of the fellows for this year. They have been inspirational for me as they have taken on their projects, and I know you'll be amazed with the work that they did with us within the last 12 weeks. They represent, in my eyes, the best of the best and hope for the future for One Seattle and all of us in our communities. And with that, let me introduce our first lovely fellow, Marisol Beas, from the City Budget Office. Marisol.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My presentation today is on partnering for success, a step towards innovation. And I'm going to start with a summary, go into timeline delivery, research process, and then end with findings and recommendations. So to start, I think it's important that we define partnerships, which are those that are mutually beneficial. They are not transactional, but truly collaborative. And they could look like city and private partnerships, city and CBO partnerships, and other types of city partnerships, and they help scale the city's innovation. Now, we know that the City of Seattle provides many of its needs and resources to our residents through cross-sector partnerships. However, our residents are missing the full benefit of these resources and services because of the existing inefficient and unclear processes for departments to enter into these partnerships. This is a missed opportunity as partnerships help us drive equity, help us bring new perspectives, and can be cost-effective for the city. To better understand how departments navigate the processes of entering into partnerships, we sought to identify pain points, preferences and attitudes, and behaviors. Further, as part of my fellowship project, I will be contributing to the Innovation and Performance Team's Practitioner Handbook, which will be available in December, and will be aimed at scaling city innovation. My focus specifically on this handbook will be to provide departments with resources to better prepare them to enter into partnerships through effective case studies, through example scope of works, data agreements, and other resources and tools. Now, although this is a resource to support departments entering into the partnership process, I think it is important that we understand the larger issue in the city. So how did we explore an efficient partnership process? We did this through the design thinking process. We started by identifying the problem, developing our research question, conducting a mixed methods approach, synthesizing and analyzing our data, and then using the surface themes and findings to guide our practitioner handbook and also our recommendations. Our research has reaffirmed our existing understanding of how the city handles partnership processes, but it is now supported by documented input from 10 different departments, 25 different staff members, and also other folks from the community. What we heard and are hearing are that there are capacity and time constraints for departments entering into partnerships. There needs to be more awareness around creating mutually beneficial partnerships. And that means having true community-led and community-driven engagement so that we could drive our projects toward equity. And that there needs to be more awareness around data sharing so that our partners can access data and benefit from our data collection. Some of the barriers expressed included lack of funding and inefficient administrative approval processes, duplication of similar projects, and lack of best practices for partnership types. An experience from a participant at City Light says the following: I'm trying to execute a partnership right now, and it's very unclear where to go. I'm getting different answers about what to do, and it makes it very challenging and time intensive to execute a partnership, and you wonder, is it even worth it? This is an opportunity where we can better equip departments by centralizing and documenting best practices, setting standards for contract processes, project and budget approvals. We already have this expertise in-house, and we can leverage this knowledge to create a truly collaborative and equitable partnership. Another quote I want to share here is from Michael Brown, who works at City Commons and frequently partners with the city. And it says, leadership should be diffused and should be collaborative. The success of any of those endeavors is going to require authentic, true partnership and collaboration. What we can do right now is focus on creating streamlined processes. That means that when a department wants to enter into, for example, a research partnership, they know where to look for partners, they know how to develop strong and equitable partnership goals, they know what necessary documentation is needed, and they have a clear roadmap of the necessary approval and budget processes to enter into a partnership, so that we spend less time figuring out how to work with partners and more time to better support our residents. A future recommendation for the city is to hire and develop a partnership specialist. This partnership specialist can play a role of helping develop and maintain city partnerships, helping ensure that there are no redundancies in research, projects, and data collection, help identify citywide needs, and ensure that we are unified and coordinated in the way that we leverage partnerships so that we can be a One Seattle. My final recommendation comes from an example from the state of California, which is an innovation incubator fund that has dedicated funds for departments with the opportunity to try new and innovative solutions to help improve the quality of life for residents. A fund that is guided by priorities, that supports departmental capacity and encourages cross-sector collaboration. Finally, it is time to better equip our departments with tools and resources they need to be able to better support our residents and partner for success. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm going to ask Sandra. I don't want to dominate the questions here, so outstanding work. And maybe this would be good for your fellows, because I'll ask probably this to others. Outstanding work, outstanding recommendations, well done. One of the challenges we have, I think, particularly in the CBO group, you would know this, is that the budget deficits that we have, right? We have increased spending. And when we look at some of these systems issues, our first inclination is always to add a person, add a person, add a person, add a specialist. And where I'm trying to get, how I'm trying to get the city to think is, as we use technology for certain issues, we have people here, human beings that can be retrained to be something else. So when you say in one of your recommendations to add a partnership specialist, which by the way seems to make all the sense in the world, develop a competency, a skill set in that position, did you think about looking at some of the areas where perhaps we are not going to have a need for in the next couple of years and converting that human being to these partnership specialists, as opposed to just taking someone off the street and them becoming partnership specialists? Because that's where we're going to have to start ahead, is trying to retool people for new positions as we add on positions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, right? If folks are already working at the city and they've been through these processes and maybe have had successful partnerships, or maybe even someone who's more centralized in the mayor's office, they can be trained to support departments and build capacity and have that unified vision versus hiring somebody new.
Yeah. And I'll give you a good example. And please, I don't want this rumor to start, because this is not a rumor. But as we look at the utility, like I'll use myself as an example. So I get a water bill and I get a power bill. And I think they come on one email, but they're at different cycles. And I think years from now, someone may talk about one bill, and there could be people working in those areas that could be retooled. And so I think the hard work for us are going to be look at areas where there's duplications and we could simplify, and then we look at that bot, those, I don't want to lay anyone off, so we could retool them. So, but I think that the need for, again, a specialist is great stuff, but that's the harder work, not just to add on, but think in our existing system who we could retool. And no one likes, it seems like people do not like to talk about that because they're hearing layoffs, and that's heresy in this world.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have our fellow from Seattle City Light, Surabhi Subedi. Surabhi.
Thank you, Sandra. So this summer, I've been working with Seattle City Light's grid modernization team to help modernize a climate-resilient distribution grid by exploring climate impacts on the grid. We all know that climate change is happening. We've all experienced it. We've seen its impact manifest in our communities in various ways. So recognizing that the gravity of this crisis, City Light is taking proactive steps to strengthen its electrical grid through grid modernization, which is essentially upgrading and implementing technologies and equipment to achieve a more reliable, robust, and equitable electrical grid. As climate change is one of the major drivers of grid modernization, ensuring a strategic response to climate impacts on grid will ensure meeting of current and future customer demands with built-in equity and resilience. Let's dive into some of the climate threats faced by Seattle residents and City Light customers who are directly or indirectly impacted by extreme heat temperature rise, flooding, both coastal and urban, wildfire smoke, and landslides. Currently, extreme heat and rising temperature pose the most imminent threat to City Light service territory, with the likelihood of events like 2021 heat dome increasing, as noted in Seattle's climate vulnerability assessment. Thus, for this presentation, I'm going to focus on extreme heat temperature rise. Seattle summer temperatures have been increasing. We've all experienced it. The graphs here show Seattle temperatures for last 50 years, and in the last 10 years, we can see sharp increase in both maximum and minimum temperatures. So how is this impacting our grid? To find some answers, I analyzed outage data to explore whether temperature increase and high heat events had any correlation with outages. The following pie chart shows summer and winter outages by categories. I define summer as May to September and winter as October to April. Here in blue, we see a larger share of outages during summer months were related to equipment failures. As equipment failure-related outages were higher during the summer months, I took a look at 2 weeks of 2021 heat dome, highlighted in yellow, alongside the 5 preceding years and 2022, and found that frequency of equipment failure-related outages in 2021 were significantly higher. It is important to note that City Light assets and equipment can handle temperatures up to 135 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Thus, increasing temperature and high heat events like such do not have a direct impact on equipment, as they are intended to remain robust even when exposed to high heat, which is amazing. However, to pinpoint the high frequency in outages during the heat wave, I explored the system load data. In this graph, we can see the system load data for the 2 weeks surrounding the heat dome in 2021. We can see the comparison to the same 2 weeks in 2016, and this graph also includes the normal, which is the average system load during that time frame for the last 24 years. The system load undergoes a cycle and requires a cool down period to alleviate stress to transformers and other equipment. If you look at the yellow line right around June 28th, you can see that there is the highest peak, and we can also see the load didn't go down. So there wasn't much of a cool down period. This may have affected the transformers and other equipment, which potentially led to equipment failure-related outages. These high heat events not only stress the systems, but they also impact our communities. During an extreme temperature event such as the 2021 heat dome, already vulnerable communities are disproportionately impacted. The map on the left shows the temperature difference between afternoon and evening on a high heat July day. The map on the right shows the social vulnerability index. And when you look at some of the red areas on the left, you can see that some of the areas didn't cool down at night, and that directly correlates with the socially vulnerable populations in Seattle in the right map. With these nuanced climate and equity challenges, now more than ever, it is critical for City Light to continue prioritizing these communities and addressing these issues through grid modernization, among other strategies. Some of my main findings are that the outage data is very complex and is maintained in different systems within City Light. This makes it challenging to assess and draw robust conclusions on climate correlations with outages without a deeper dive and extensive data analysis across different divisions. I also found that extreme temperatures may induce outages more indirectly, primarily by increasing the electrical load than through direct temperature effects. Prolonged high load can stress the grid system, potentially resulting in equipment failures when transformers and other components are unable to cycle. My main recommendation for City Light would be that alongside all the amazing work they've been doing, they should expand their climate change analysis and equity considerations, specifically in their grid modernization planning and implementation. To achieve this, City Light should focus on extensive data acquisition and analysis, and this looks like breaking down silos among divisions and collaborating to better collect data, report and maintain the quality of outage data, which also includes robust weather data reporting. In addition, Seattle City Light should invest in a pilot project to install local weather stations to obtain more granular and spatially distributed weather data, especially because of the existing microclimates. Furthermore, to better understand the impact of temperature on the grid, Seattle City Light should perform in-depth analysis of asset data to identify potential relationship between temperature variation and expected lifespan of equipment. Within this, to better gauge the underground ambient temperature, sensors should be installed. Building a resilient power infrastructure would be incomplete without advancing equity. Equity should be central to all the future grid modernization planning and implementation, because when vulnerable communities are out of power on hot summer days, their exposure to higher temperature could lead to a differential heat-related issues. As sustained high temperature become more frequent and temperatures don't get to cool down, system reliability becomes critical in these areas. Capital improvement projects such as community microgrids, flizzer schemes, and remote switching projects should be prioritized in socially burdened and vulnerable areas to ensure reliable and equitable power supply during extreme weather events. Thank you. And I would also like to thank Randa and Kinchu for their constant support throughout this fellowship. It was amazing working with them. Thanks.
Surabhi, I have a question, if I may. Maybe this can be the I used to cross-examine people for a living. Again, outstanding, simply outstanding. I'm going to ask you a very tough question, though. You want a tough question or an easy question? You're supposed to say tough question. That was not the first question.
You can ask me a tough question.
Mayor, give me the tough question. That's the spirit right there.
Yes.
So I found myself agreeing with all of your analysis and your recommendations, so great work product. There's a part of me that wants to know, did you make a conclusion prematurely and then gave a presentation to support it? So what I mean by that is there are a lot of factors that will go into system unreliability.
Yeah. Tree
growth. Older facilities and a delayed capital plan, delayed investments in an older structure, right? There are many other factors. How do you know climate change was the primary factor? Or is that your argument that climate change is such a critical factor in system unreliability? or can it be other factors, and climate change is just one of many? I can see where that fit into what all, there are many causes for system unreliability, right? One of them, for example, is when we looked at where we buried cable, where we buried wires, that you see a huge disparity in some of the more affluent areas have underground cable, and we know that all of that stuff is aging out, and that technology and the products then were inferior to where they are now. We know that causes system unreliability. So how do you know that climate change is on the top of those causes? I told you it was a tough question, so you asked for the tough one.
Let me think about this. So that's why I said one of the major, but with changing climate, like, temperature is rising, and when you look... No, I Yeah, I definitely just focused on climate change. So I am not aware about the other system unreliability causes, but because climate is changing and it's causing the equipments, it's not directly causing the equipments to fail, but in our finding, so that was our major question, was like, we don't want to come to a conclusion before we see anything. So in the beginning, when I was doing the thing, I was like, oh, maybe the high heat is causing equipment to fail. And then we talked to standards, and they were like, oh, our ambient temperature rating is super high, so it's not that. But then we did see during the high heat event, during the heat dome, there was 53 instances of outages versus all the other years. And to rule out aging infrastructure, I also did 2022, and you can see 2022 was just 14 of them in the same period. The data is definitely nuanced, and there's so much more to it, but this is just a high-level analysis and finding. And definitely other things will be kind of like, I'm doing a detailed report, and I will definitely acknowledge that this is not the only cause, and this is one of the drivers of grid modernization, and one of the drivers that the system could be unreliable. Yes.
I could build on the mayor's theory and ask the question, could these effects be interrelated? Rather than necessarily being able to disaggregate unique individual effects, these things could be compounding on each other. What if our legacy, and this is true for my assets too, right? Our historical lack of full investment in maintaining our infrastructure creates even more vulnerability in a world of climate change. Yeah. And so actually these things are compounding each other. Just a thought.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
This is an easy one. On your recommendations, you talked about data sharing, and so I'm just curious, like data sharing within the city or with other entities. Just curious who that would be with, and what have been the barriers for that data collection and maintenance of data?
For this, I was thinking about within divisions within City Light, because right now it's like every division has their own system of storing data, looking at data, and it looks like this could be expanded and shared within the City Light department, but and also acknowledging that some of these data is confidential, because we're dealing with outage data, which has customer information and stuff. So I was mostly talking about within the department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have our fellow from Human Service Department, Katrina May.
All right, thank you, Sandra. My name is Katrina, and this summer I joined the Crime Survivor Services, or CSS, which is a division of the Human Services Department. And I was asked to provide recommendations that address vicarious trauma and burnout among crime victim advocates within the CSS unit. I recommend refining the city's approach to the victim advocate workforce through trauma-informed practices, which includes employee training, increasing unit capacity, facilitating unit empowerment, and forming a working group for cooperative and sustainable changes across the criminal justice system. To understand the advocate's role and derive these recommendations, I began with a literature and document review to really gain that foundational understanding. And then I conducted non-participant observation, shadowing, and interviews to identify key themes within advocacy work. System-based advocates face several challenges in conducting their work, which includes the intersectionality of core issues, a lack of resources and support systems, and the necessity of building partnerships, garnering community support, and navigating bureaucracy. These barriers exist on top of emotionally demanding work with clients who are experiencing trauma. It's not surprising that a 2023 study found symptoms of vicarious trauma in 81% of rape victim advocates, who are understood to have vicarious trauma because of the various PTSD symptoms that are present within them. One advocate specifically described coming back from vacation, and they said that they were still just treading. With burnout, unless there are systemic changes in how you work or what is burning you out, it is whatever helps. It would be nice to float sometimes. It gets tiring treading water. Within CSS, many advocates noted in their interviews that organizational structures and interpersonal factors were the largest sources of workplace stressors, which are organized into this socio-ecological model. Experts on trauma in the workplace say that the most effective interventions address risk and protective factors at each level of this model. Advocates carry immense dedication to their work on an individual level, but face several barriers to conducting survivor-centered services. They described experiences with access to personal power in accessing client information, conflict in workforce expectations because they are housed under both the Human Services Department and SPD, Seattle Police Department. And most advocates witness clients being re-victimized by the criminal justice system itself. Their role is highly misunderstood. One advocate described how she has challenges, quote, having to prove that the job is real, that I am trustworthy. I have to fight to get basic information I should have from the get-go. Multiple advocates also described how senior city administrators actually unintentionally overstepped into their role and affected client satisfaction. Through these results, I have several recommendations that address some of the areas of opportunity within each of these realms. The first is to develop and conduct training on vicarious trauma, PTSD, and trauma-informed care for city employees in high-stress, very public-facing roles. This includes training supervisors and managers on recognizing and responding to vicarious trauma and burnout in their divisions. Increasing emotional intelligence and awareness of these issues can help employees advocate for themselves and help managers recognize early signs of burnout in their employees. As a uniquely co-located division, I also recommend permitting the CSS unit to define their position scope, flex schedules, and workplace locations according to trauma-informed best practices. Justice system partners may need to adjust their communications for cases accordingly, but creating these boundaries that define and defend reasonable expectations of employees in this type of classification really addresses multiple risk factors of vicarious trauma and provides agency to the unit in a rapidly changing political field. On an organizational level, I recommend supporting staffing and community resources for the unit in proportion to increasing crime rates. This will help limit advocate caseloads, reduce work hours, and decrease the proportion of staff to supervisors for more comprehensive employee support and mentoring. This approach may have the greatest impact on client satisfaction for residents, as the unit can more effectively respond to survivors they serve and work towards really preventing re-victimization within the system. And my final recommendation is to facilitate cooperation between all of the different agencies involved by forming a multidisciplinary trauma-informed work group or committee that's composed of law enforcement, legal, and community service agencies involved in the criminal justice system. And the key goals of this group would be to introduce and clarify their roles in providing survivor-centered services, troubleshooting any emerging communication barriers between advocates and their agencies that they work with, and incorporating trauma-informed initiatives across the system for both staff members and the residents. I'd like to thank the Mayor's Office for taking on this project and listening to these results, as well as the CSS unit itself. Through my work with the advocates, I learned how important it is to lead your work with empathy and compassion. I really personally identified with something an advocate said towards one of the ends of our interviews. Advocates continue to get asked why they continue on in a job that's so intense. But she said, "I feel fulfillment every day. I'm doing the work and trying." And I believe we can create lasting change when we listen and learn and keep on trying. So thank you. Are there any questions?
Why are you looking at me, Katrina?
Just in case.
Katrina, can you go back to the slide on the recommendations, please? Thank you, Katrina. Again, wow, good stuff. In these four, I think the comments you made about the statements about the person, why he or she did it, about the fulfillment they received. When I look at the victims advocates that I know, that they do have victories, they do have moments of triumph, and that seems to be their inspiration. And I continue to say, in public service, you have to have fun. You have to find joy. You have to find passion in doing it. And you're going to take a lot of losses, but those victories, they're sweet. And I think that helps out with the burnout and the other issues. So, and so, how do you create those victories? How do you celebrate them? How do you have a party and a celebrate? Because you never finish. It's always a continuum, right? So, in those boxes, where is the party? It's sort of like the guy lifting weights there. It's where you get together and you have those weekly celebrations to keep you. Did I miss that part in one of your recommendations?
No, I am so glad you asked that because I did give those recommendations directly to the unit, and that was an important part of the work itself, is identifying those strengths that the unit has and where they are, celebrating and where they can celebrate more. Throughout the time that I spent with the advocates, especially during the shadow portion, I think we spent maybe like a total of an hour playing with the dogs that are in the different units at SPD headquarters, and that was just like a moment of respite for a lot of the advocates. And there are examples like units who go out to a happy hour together, or they just chat with each other throughout the day about pop culture, or go to lunch together. And I think those are the only opportunities that they can really get, which are, in the workplace, in that in-office environment, to be able to celebrate together. But because their workloads are so high and they're doing so much casework on the day-to-day, it's really hard to incorporate that into schedules and find that and make that a priority, because it is, a public service role. And being in public service, these advocates are so survivor-centered and focused on what the survivor needs in the moment. There are so many emergency situations that come up. And so to be able to incorporate celebration on a regular basis is really hard to be able to do because of that immense work. But I did see a lot of that throughout my time with CSS, the amount of humor that they used, the amount of support that they gave each other and saying, oh, you did a really good job on that case, or that was a really good idea. Thank you for that resource. So that's what I saw and how I think that they have a lot of strengths in reducing burnout. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks. I was just curious, in looking at this work, I imagine this is a challenge that is pretty widespread among other cities. I'm thinking of maybe the training question specifically, but were you able to do any look at like where are the good examples of places that are doing this well, that have found a way to really support people in these sorts of roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there was one report that I found from the NYPD that talked about the trauma-informed interventions that they are doing, and it was just a long report. I think there are like dozens of different interventions that they've tried and that they've been doing for different people in their systems. And I think that there are a lot of training opportunities outside of victim advocacy work as well, because vicarious trauma doesn't happen only within the criminal justice system. It's also impacting teachers and other public serving roles, doctors and physicians. It's across the whole city system. And I think we saw that a lot with burnout during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there are a number of other organizations like SAMHSA that are doing some great work around training. SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And they have created a whole framework for trauma-informed care and vicarious trauma that a lot of people are using now to build out their organizations. Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you all.
Thanks, Katrina. Great work. Let me introduce our next fellow from, again, Human Services Department, Jade Yan. Jade.
Thank you, Sandra, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jade. I use they, them pronouns. And this summer, I worked with the Human Services Department with a focus on the behavioral health crisis response. And before I started, I wanted to provide a content warning, as I will be speaking to both substance use disorders and mental health, which includes overdose and suicidal ideation. So the Human Services Department identified an opportunity for the city to develop a more cohesive strategy to determine both its funding priorities and the role it plays in the behavioral health field, including crisis response. Without a more clearly defined strategy, the city's response to an expanding need for behavioral health services has been fragmented. It was previously seen as the responsibility of the state to care for the mentally ill, but due to deinstitutionalization, people were moved out of inpatient psychiatric facilities with no appropriate community-based alternatives. The responsibility then fell to communities to make up the difference, but with no clear guidance or even funding provided. Cities hold the role of emergency/crisis response, as cities are responsible for public safety departments, including fire and police. We see today's impact of deinstitutionalization resulting in our first responders handling behavioral health crises and the city being asked by its residents to invest in and provide behavioral health services that used to be provided by the state. And today, Medicaid is the single largest funder of behavioral health services in the country. 80% of people in Washington state with behavioral health disorders served by community-based providers rely solely on Medicaid. There's a gap, though, between behavioral health needs and services rendered. For Medicaid beneficiaries in King County, it was found that 25,762 people had a substance use disorder treatment need, and only 36% of people received treatment. And similarly, 78,434 had a mental health treatment need, and only 54% of people received treatment. Mild behavioral health conditions that go unaddressed can result in crises and more acute levels of care down the line. Here we have rates of emergency department visits in King County related to suicidal ideation broken down by age on the left and race on the right. We can see significantly higher rates amongst our youth, especially those 10 to 19 years of age, represented by the blue bar in the left-hand graph. We also see significantly higher rates amongst American Indian/Alaska Native populations, represented by the green bar on the right-hand graph. I also know you all are acutely aware of the fentanyl and opioid crisis. I want to call out these age-adjusted rates of overdose deaths in King County, broken down by race/ethnicity and region, highlighting how Seattle is being disproportionately impacted by the opioid epidemic, as well as American Indian/Alaska Native, Black, and Hispanic populations. So the goal is that the City of Seattle develops an iterative plan regarding behavioral health, which includes establishing its priority populations and services and methods of interdepartmental external partner coordination in order to better leverage our resources and serve our communities. An iterative plan means it's adapted over time, acknowledging the fact that the behavioral health field is rapidly changing every day. So how do we get there? For one, it's crucial for the city to continue to cultivate its partnership with the county. King County's Department of Community and Human Services holds a great deal of weight in the behavioral health field. So DCHS manages the integrated care network for Medicaid, as well as state-funded and federally funded programs like the 988 crisis line, designated crisis responders, as well as a huge network of services funded through county levies like the mental illness and drug dependency tax. Our communities in Seattle are directly impacted by decisions made at the county level. The city must leverage its influence and increase its presence and voice in those conversations in order to ensure our residents' behavioral health needs are proportionately met. When developing strategy, include input from all city departments and divisions that are involved in behavioral health. Part of that collaboration requires ongoing awareness of and communication with other internal city initiatives and groups like the Unified Care Team, Reach Out Initiative, and Fentanyl Systems Work Group. By increasing awareness of each other's work at the city level, we can then provide more effective services. And while we all benefit from increased access to behavioral health services, the city only has so many resources and therefore needs a plan that prioritizes what types of services it funds and which populations it aims to reduce disparities for. I recommend that the city prioritize youth of color and queer youth, unhoused people and people of color, especially American Indian / Alaska Native, Black, and Hispanic / Latinx people, and people currently involved in the criminal justice system. I recommend that the city continues to fund our first responder services to adapt their care models to better care for and serve those experiencing behavioral health crises, like through the Health One and Crisis Response Team programs. Invest in preventative upstream services, such as focusing on supporting our youth or increasing comprehensive and affordable coverage for behavioral health care by promoting Medicaid enrollment or reducing stigma by investing in educational campaigns. Fund agencies that employ evidence-informed practices and models such as trauma-informed care, harm reduction services, and housing first. Fund culturally specific services, which is to say services by and for marginalized populations. All in all, the city must create a more cohesive strategic plan with all city departments involved in behavioral health that is reviewed and reevaluated on a yearly basis. Increase the city's capacity to sit in conversations with the county with established target populations and service priorities in mind to ensure that our community's particular needs are met. Thank you so much.
I love this body of work that you addressed, and it's, as mayor, it's this area that you've chosen to dig into is the most astounding for me because it's one of my biggest challenges. Mm-hmm. Can you go back to the first recommendation where you talked about, I think the word was collaborative with the county, number one, there you go, cultivate our partnership. So I'm going to be more drastic than that. Sure. I can't control or heavily influence the RHA or the King County Department of Community and Human Services or the Healthier Here. I'm not a continuum of care organization. I don't get the money directly. I fund, and I'm more of an indirect leader, indirect influencer. Mm-hmm. Did you consider us becoming a continuum of care or getting out of the partnership with the county? Because I have a sense of urgency on people who are sick. I agree strongly with your other recommendations about groups we need to look at, sub-demographics of who is hurting the most. Mm-hmm. That's why I said I love this body of work. I have not been convinced that the model we've had for the last 5, 10, 15, 30 years works.
Right.
I don't know how to cultivate our partnership with the county as well as I want to. I can't control it. I have indirect control. And I think when you, on the other during your summer, you use that word again, like improve our relationships with. These are my friends over across the street. And, you know, Dow Constantine and the council members, I talk to them all the time. But we have the structure, Jay, the model is such that, you know, I think I can't remember how many people we have sitting on the Board of Health, but we're more indirect influencers. So could one of your recommendations be we get out of these partnerships and become a direct, I mean, I know it sort of sounds disruptive, but we get out of this partnership and we go into the direct care, or we fund directly the groups we want to see done. Number one. Number two, I got two questions for you. That in some of my work, I tap into the faith-based communities as well. And it's not so much, when I say faith-based, I'm not talking about religion or God. I'm talking about a lot of people just lost faith in themselves. They lost their confidence in life. You look at a third or fourth grader, they come out, you know, happy, and they love each other. And you look at people there, they've just lost their purpose. And even though we can get them clean and sober and a little bit on a better path, there has to be some kind of faith-based element to it. So right now I'm looking at organizations to invest in, and I'm not talking about hitting someone over the head with a Bible. I'm just talking about someone who says, you know, I used to be you, and this is how I garner my faith. And I never hear that in the health conversations about the internal mental faith piece of a person's journey. And I think, quite frankly, I think that's a new conversation that this country needs to have right now. We are dying, and people say faith. Well, what are you're a Bible thumper? They're just missing the point. I don't care if they're atheists; they can still have a faith in themselves, at least that they have a purpose on earth. So, I gave you sort of two convoluted, crazy ass Meryl questions, Jade, so you could deal with it the best you could. Outstanding presentation.
Well, I think it's actually perfect that you asked those questions, given just the convoluted and complex nature of behavioral health, right? It's not straightforward, because if it was, we would have a very straightforward path forward.
Did you say maybe get out of our partnerships? Do you consider that? The partnerships not working?
I think in a lot of my assessment during the summer, what was really driven home for me and what I read about was, what I spoke to is that Medicaid is the single largest funder of behavioral health services in this country. And a lot of that then is broken down into who kind of holds that power. And a lot of it is held at DCHS with King County. But that's not to say that, you know, that's how things have been and has to stay that way forever. I really appreciate that you want to take that as you're saying, I see certain things like these more faith-based organizations or services that you are passionate about and you want to support and take a more assertive stance and just fund those. City of Seattle does that quite a bit through a variety of departments, through HSD, through DEAL. We do fund community-based organizations. We do get to say, we see that these organizations are providing these services that our communities are wanting and needing. And that's great. I also think it's important to not necessarily throw away our relationships with those at the county, because they do hold just so much of that power. But how can we better leverage and ensure that our communities in Seattle are proportionately taken care of?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just want to add a couple of resources. I think community-based clinics are also doing a great amount of work in bridging the gap, especially with the culturally appropriate services. I also want to lift up immigrant and refugee community is also the highly impacted, as they are the population that don't even have insurance. So, you know, access to healthcare is super important in that space too.
Yeah,
but thank you for your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Jade. And with this, let's take a quick 10-minute break. Let me do a special call out to our project planning team members in the room. Great work pulling this all together. And our lovely Oprah, who's doing our mic work today, Leah Booley. Yay. And our AV person here with Stephanie Thornton. Thank you so much. So let me introduce our next fellow, Elena Arakaki from Seattle Parks and Recreation. Elena.
Thank you, Sandra. Let's start here. Hi, everyone. I'm Elena. I'm the Mayor's Fellow with Seattle Parks and Rec this summer, and I'm here to talk about the new Swim Seattle initiative and present some recommendations for the future. Swim Seattle was launched in April of this year as a pilot program to increase access to swim lessons by providing kids with free swimming lessons. The first cohort of kids went through lessons this summer, and 195 participants were registered for free lessons. The opportunity to participate was offered to families who were already receiving scholarships for swim lessons, and they were allowed to register 2 weeks ahead of the general population. Swim lessons fill up very quickly, so this priority registration was an important way to increase access. I want to talk about why swim lessons are so important. This data draws on my previous work with Public Health Seattle-King County's Violence and Injury Prevention Team. Recent trends have showed us that preventable drowning deaths are on the rise. Over the past 5 years, we've seen 135 unintentional deaths, with an increase since 2019 in King County. Recent heat waves since 2020 have contributed to this increase. More people are looking for refuge in the cool water, and heat will continue to be an issue as climate change intensifies. In fact, over half of these drownings have happened in open water, which is why water competence is especially important here in the Puget Sound region. Studies have shown that swimming lessons are a protective factor against drowning, so Swim Seattle hopes to reverse these trends long term. There are also racial disparities in drowning rates. Black and American Indian Alaska Native residents are overrepresented in drowning deaths. These disparities exist for a variety of reasons, from historic racism in pools to intergenerational water trauma to barriers like the cost of swim lessons. Swim Seattle hopes to close these racial gaps by eliminating the cost for families of color. This summer, we had 195 participants, and most of the cohort that we have data for have been children of color. We have some data gaps for race that we're looking to fill with a new survey. In terms of age, it's mostly younger kids participating in beginning swim lessons, then participation drops off in teenage years. I'll be coming back to this point in my recommendations. When I first came on, I was tasked with identifying success measures for the program, which also meant pinpointing goals that everyone could agree on. I needed to know what we were trying to accomplish with Swim Seattle and how we would know if we were successful. My deliverables for the summer will be a logic model to show connections between activities and goals, and a final learnings and recommendations report that I'll present to the department. This is the skeleton of the logic model that I developed. This shows the flow of inputs needed to make the program successful, what activities and outputs would be carried out, and what outcomes it would all work towards. Zooming into the blue outcomes box here, after meeting with staff and partners, our team agreed on 3 goals to work towards. First, increasing access to swim lessons as a short-term goal for BIPOC communities, families with low incomes, and areas with low swim participation rates. I identified these populations because of the racial swim disparities we saw before, the financial burden of swim lessons on low-income families, and wanting to bring in new participants who haven't taken lessons before. Second, increasing water competence as a medium-term goal. This part is important because we can reduce barriers to lessons, but it won't matter if people aren't showing up or if they're not improving. So this measures skill progression and attendance. And third, reducing drowning deaths and racial disparities as our long-term goal. It was helpful to first identify these outcomes and then work backwards to think about what activities would get us here. With these outcomes in mind, my first recommendation is to host water safety workshops to improve water competence for Swim Seattle participants. Water competence is a combination of swim skills plus knowledge plus attitudes. The free lessons would cover the swim skills part, and these workshops would address knowledge and attitudes. These workshops would talk about things like the importance of pool supervision for kids, how to fit a life jacket, how to respond to common drowning situations, and share community partner resources. Studies have shown that parents significantly overestimate their child's swim ability, and most child drownings happen when parents are not supervising. So these workshops would emphasize parents' role in water safety. My second recommendation is about teens. As we saw on the graph earlier, the summer cohort participation dropped off at age 14, but teens are the second highest age group at risk for drowning after toddlers. This recommendation brings teens to the pool for late-night teen-only programming and offers job pathways for them to become lifeguards and swim instructors. There's a severe aquatic staffing shortage right now, so this would create more job opportunities for youth within the system. And my third recommendation is overarching and will drive the success of all other activities, which is building community with partner organizations. We already have a great coalition of partners working on Swim Seattle listed here, and I recommend deepening them and expanding them to include more community-based organizations that would help build trust with communities and bring new participants into the program. Again, here are my priority recommendations that will further the short, medium, and long-term goals of Swim Seattle while building water safety skills, knowledge, partnerships, and employment. I believe that Swim Seattle is a promising initiative, and these recommendations will improve the program to push for equitable access to lessons, increased water competence, and drowning prevention for Seattle residents. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
I have a question, Elena. Outstanding. This is very near and dear to me because it was the idea of Swim Seattle sort of, it wasn't my idea. I'm just going to take credit for it, by the way. But this is near and dear. I think if I asked how many people have either directly or indirectly know someone who's drowned or know a family that was impacted, a lot of hands would go up. I'll tell you a quick little story, if I may, that when I was running for mayor, I met a young woman with 2 children, and the boy was just, he's such a beautiful young man. He's about 14 or so. And he was excited to meet me, and we talked, and the mother knew me a little bit from when I was on the council, and it was just an exciting day. It was at a Safeway during the summer. This young man died 2 weeks later, drowned at Green Lake. Didn't know how to swim. It broke my heart, and I talked to the mother several times, and I didn't understand why there was this racial disparity, and your numbers speaks for themselves. And so when I say it's near and dear to me, thank you for doing this work, for this body of work. I hope when you continue your education and move on that you could see this thing sort of really turn into saving so many lives. I guess the question I would have is, do you see this also as, we're always trying to bring communities together, and take the API community example, there's so much diversity within the API community, and so do you think, it's always sort of cool, do you think there are also opportunities here to do cross-cultural teachings and friendships? How might that play into this journey and learning how to swim? Do you think that could be a byproduct of it, or should we be intentional if you're sticking in these people of different cultural backgrounds or religions all in the water? Do you think in addition to swimming there's some opportunities, or is just learn how to swim and go back home? And to tell me about maybe a vision you may have.
That's a great point. I think this is a really good opportunity to bring some of those cultural experiences together and partnership building. And I think that builds on my third recommendation of bringing more partners together and working to do outreach to specific cultural communities and meeting the needs of the people that you're working with, which will vary depending on which community you're working with. But I think this is a really great way of bringing people together, engaging them in the pool, out of the pool for learning and workshops, whatever would help them feel most comfortable getting to the pool and getting to learn to swim. And I know there are many barriers to even just feeling comfortable getting in the pool. And so I think learning from community partners would be a really good first step to doing that.
Yeah. And a follow-up, sorry to dominate, but I told you it was near and dear to me, so that's what happens is, in our park system, that in grade school and more middle school and high school, the great basketball players and soccer players and football players and baseball players, they sort of know who they are by the time they get to high school. There's stars and there's people that, it's not for me, I suck. But I don't golf. But everyone sort of sucks at golf. They don't know how to do it, right? It's something that's, and I thought about how do we create mentors, volunteers out here that could teach a lot of the children who just aren't the big jocks in high school. And swimming is much like that. And I thought about, we have, how many golf ranges? We have four golf ranges, and those, and I don't golf, like I said, obviously, but I looked at those assets that, like Jefferson Golf Course, how do I use that for mentoring opportunities? So you get someone that likes to golf, and then you talk to some inner city kid at Rainier Beach and say, hey, I'm going to teach you. You didn't make varsity. You have to almost be a D1 athlete to make Rainier Beach's basketball team, by the way. You talk to some of these, and I thought swimming could be the same thing, particularly if they don't know how to swim. You get kids from all over, and you get volunteers here, not just paid our staff, but volunteers to come and say, I'll spend some time. I'm a pretty proficient swimmer. So we can now have the mentoring piece as an element of the swim. So I'm looking at the Swim Seattle being more just swimming in and of itself. That's a big need, but the mentoring opportunities. And I want you to think about that as you continue to follow this work.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's actually one of my recommendations, not included here, but in my final report, that is exploring opportunities for partnership with the Seattle Mentors program that'll be launching soon, and I think that could be a really good opportunity for collaboration.
Excellent. See, you're, like most people, you're one step in front of me. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad I got to ask a question. This one guy keeps hogging the mic. Just kidding, Mayor. So I work on the innovation and performance team for Affordable Seattle. One of the things that my team is really interested in is like the barriers that exist for people to access a lot of the great programs that we already have that are already well funded and already well established. So in your recommendations, in your presentation, you show a short-term goal, 3-month goal of like increasing access to the swim lessons. Can you say more about any of the identified barriers that you looked at that prevent that exact access right now?
Yes, so Swim Seattle is mostly addressing the barrier of cost, which I read an article from the Seattle Times from last year that said cost can be a big barrier for families, even with our scholarship system in place, but many families aren't aware of that or haven't been set up with that. So breaking down cost. And then I think there are a lot of cultural barriers to feeling welcome in pools. And that's where the workshops and the more community piece gets at, that if you bring people in a setting that they're more familiar with inviting your entire family, inviting your community to come and learn about swim safety and opportunities at the pool and learn about scholarship opportunities, I think that could help break down some of those barriers that might be harder to reach otherwise.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elena. Great work. Next up is our fellow from Office of Housing, Allison Campion. Allison.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. Wow. Thanks so much. I was in the Office of Housing this summer, and the guiding question for my project was, how can the Office of Housing, or OH, better leverage its data? So the office has to use data in a number of ways. They have annual reports where they need to explain how they made investments over the past year and who's benefited. They need to respond to questions from City Council and the Mayor's office. So they might be asked how many 0 to 30% annual median income houses, 1-bedroom units are in downtown, and they need to answer quickly and accurately. And then they're always planning for the future. So they need to think about where and how they're investing next and what metrics are guiding those investments to ensure they align with the values and the goals of the city. Now, the current problem is that the data system to address all of these use cases is slow and labor intensive and inefficient. So we're leaving a lot of information on the table and using a lot of staff time to try to address each of these. So this summer, I came in and tried to look at the data workflow to see how does the data workflow currently work and where are the challenges and how can we find some solutions. So just to orient you very broadly, on the left we have data collection and storage. So information's coming in, everything from bank statements of developers to income reports from tenants living in regulated units. That gets stored in databases in the office, and then staff members are asked questions. So they need to do analysis. So they query the databases, extract information, build tables and reports in Excel to report out the data. So when I asked folks in the office, what are the challenges in this workflow, point out the issues, two major ones I want to highlight. The first is that there's just a lot more data. So these systems were built 20 years ago, and the amount of information needing to be recorded has really grown. So the portfolio has grown, the budget of the office has grown, and that means there's more reporting. So there's more dollars to track, there's more policies to monitor for regulation. The other problem dates back to the IT centralization effort from several years back. So what happened prior to kind of centralization of the IT system was that there was someone that sat in the office who managed the databases. And when someone needed to build a report, they went to that staff member and said, hey, can you update how we're exporting this data from the database? Can you add this field? Can you add this report? And they exported, and that kind of was how the process worked. But as you shifted that role into IT, you lost that data professional in the office, and there weren't additional systems put in place to kind of help staff in the office pick up that data analysis slack. So the result is that there's just more pressure on staff in the office to do more data analysis. And that leads to individuals coming up with solutions, which really means there's a proliferation of Excel spreadsheets that are tracking programs, doing data cleaning, performing analysis. And that's all because there aren't really tools and systems in place to assist those staff members. So this is pretty inefficient, it's labor intensive, it's siloed, and a lot of this analysis isn't replicable. So this summer, what we looked to do is to create kind of a modern data analysis workflow in the office where we could centralize our data analysis projects, automate some of our data cleaning and processing, and analyze the data with Power BI. So this process is helpful because when you update your data, add new data, you can refresh your workflow and you don't lose all of the work in the middle. And then everyone's also aware of the processes of how the data was cleaned, how it was analyzed. And when we go back to do next year's annual report, we don't have to start from scratch. So in order to make this effective or help folks in the office adopt these new tools, it involves teaching. So I spent the summer creating some example projects and video tutorials and a technical guide for the office to explain how to use these systems. And we also revamped a data working group within the office to encourage collaboration and peer support so that people could focus on solving problems together. So one example of a dashboard I created using this workflow is just an overview of the portfolio of the Office of Housing's city-funded projects. So this just has a map of all the projects and some basic informations like unit sizes and regulatory agreements on those projects. So this dashboard addresses that kind of third data use case of strategic planning. So this information should be available for decision makers, and up until now the data was rather scattered, and so kind of using our workflow to produce a dashboard to help improve the decision-making process. So overall, in the long run, I think what's important here for a lot of offices, so the Office of Housing is a medium-sized office, and I think a lot of small and medium-sized offices might struggle with this, is to adopt a lot of shared principles of data analysis, because often we don't even know when things are not being done the best they can be done. So it involves management and everyone in the office knowing that things can be better, and that involves having a vision of what that looks like. And that is coupled with kind of institutionalizing the upskilling of staff. So luckily, this recommendation is not to hire anyone new, but to take folks that don't have analyst in their title, but say you're already doing a lot of data analysis, and give them support and training and a process by which to level up what they're doing so they're not spending all of their time doing repetitive tasks. And the goal here is to relieve the staff time spent on those data cleaning and repetitive tasks so that they can be spending their time on more advanced metrics and analysis and doing what they're already really good at. So yeah, we want to encourage folks in offices to kind of take on more of the analysis and not relegate data to an IT problem, but that involves kind of giving structure and support for folks to be upskilled. Yeah, so I just want to say thank you to Sandra and the Mayor's Fellows and also the Office of Housing. I really enjoyed my time there, had a great experience with everyone, and I'm looking forward to the housing levy being passed in the fall. So thank you.
I've been admonished by the IP group not to ask questions since this is in their sweet spot of data, I'm going to defer and see what brilliant questions they have first.
First, I want to. Thanks. I'm Steve Barham. First, I love this, and I want to thank you for your presentation. And I also want to acknowledge that you have also been helping us immensely with the One Seattle data strategy. And this is completely in alignment with what we're trying to do. So my question is, on these recommendations and things like this, how do you think about scaling that not just at Office of Housing, but across the city? Because it seems like a pretty universal problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, as Steve mentioned, there's the, I've been working with him directly on talking about how do we build capacity. So a lot of my work was really kind of overlapping with what's already going on. So I think a lot of the recommendations that will come out of the City Data Alliance working group will match these. But I think a lot of this is about just matching people with tools that already exist. So we've already invested in all of these tools, and we've already invested in people, and there's just a mismatch. And so often people, when they say, I need to do, better data analysis, they just don't know where to go or what to look at, and there's too many options. So just kind of curating the trainings that already exist and saying, what skills do you have and what skills should you look for next? So giving people more guidance. So I think maybe having a centralized portal where people can access trainings and that kind of guidance across the city would be really helpful, especially, again, for departments that don't have IT directly in their office. They don't have those resources. So we can definitely centralize that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Great work. Next up, we have Janie Stewart from Seattle Human Resources. Janie.
Thank you, Sandra. The role of my fellowship with the city this summer has been to evaluate the formalized mentor programs for city employees. So the workforce development team that I've had the privilege to work with this summer strives toward the vision of an equitable, inclusive One Seattle for all city employees. However, one of the factors the development team has been addressing is that workforce equity among city employees is difficult to achieve because there's often less accessibility to career growth opportunities for lower wage earners and historically underrepresented groups. For example, currently, while people of color make up nearly 45% of the city workforce, they represent nearly 60% of bottom wage earners and only 35% of top wage earners. So my fellowship has been to research one of the proven career pathways that can help lower wage earners advance into new positions in the workplace, and that's mentorship. So as I talk about mentorship, I want to ask you a question. Think back over your life. Can you identify one or two people that were instrumental in getting you to where you are today? Who has walked alongside you? While those people might not have been mentors, the role that they played in your lives is really the value of a mentor relationship. And I would imagine most of us can think of someone who was instrumental for us. There's lots of definitions of mentorship, but a simple one I like, developmental partnership, which you just saw. Simple one, developmental partnership. That's really what we're talking about with mentorship. And there has been 50 years of robust empirical research about mentorship and the benefits that it brings to the workplace. And in the midst of all of that research, there's been three fundamental kind of foundational benefits. The first is psychosocial functions. And this is really about improving trust, enhanced professional and personal development. It's really about relationship building skills. The next is better job satisfaction and higher rates of retention for both mentors and mentees, which leads to cost savings because there's less turnover. And then finally, there's a strong predictor of career advancement and compensation for mentees. Mentees tend to make higher salaries and are promoted more frequently than their non-mentored counterparts. Also, mentorship increases diversity in management as well. I could go on and on about all the benefits of mentorship in the workplace. As you can see, mentees, mentors, organizations all benefit, as subsequent studies have shown. So, How's the city of Seattle doing? Well, as you can see on the list, the city has quite a few departmental programs. Not all of them are your classic mentorship. There's also job shadowing and skills and knowledge transfer. Flash mentorships are one-time meetings. And there's also informal mentorships, like through racial ethnic affinity groups as well. Over the weeks I've been here, I've had several conversations with people about their experience of mentorship as a city employee, and they've been really exciting, inspiring stories of empowering relationships. However, not all these programs are active. Some are in the process of restarting. Also, since ongoing cohort mentor programs are within departments, that means not every city employee has equitable access to mentorship. Currently, only 10 of 40 departments have programs, making it difficult for mentorship to align with the city's race and social justice initiative and to build equitable access to career development. Steps have been taken to try to increase the positive movement for workforce equity through mentorships. Last year, a stakeholder group of people from 10 different departments came together with the goal of creating a unified network of mentorship. They wanted to align mentorship across departments, enhance collaboration, and really move toward workforce equity in these ways. One of the initial steps that came out of that was using the Cronus software program as a way to hopefully increase access to mentorship for more employees and to align citywide. In March, the Flash Mentorship Program was introduced, so all employees would have some access to mentorship. These are one-time meetings that are done across departmentally in order to provide career advice and information. And then this fall, some of the existing cohorts are going to move their mentor program onto the Cronus software platform in order to align citywide while they continue as a department. There's many reasons to be optimistic about the movement of mentorship and the benefits that it provides to the workplace and the way they're at work in the city. And I have a few recommendations. The first, leadership support. One of the most significant factors in successful formal mentorship programs is the involvement of senior leadership. This can take a lot of different forms. It can be executives volunteering to be mentors. It can be them championing the mentorship program in their department and with their supervisors. And it can mean that mentorship is incorporated into every level of the organization, from initial onboarding to promotion, because leadership advocacy can transform a culture. Next is a citywide mentoring framework. So developing a mentorship policy to align departments across the city is really going to help increase collaboration and uphold the values of the One Seattle initiative. And finally, resources. Robust financial and personnel support are vital for the longevity of any mentorship program. It's important that HR has the resources it needs to function as a central hub for lots of reasons, but I'm going to highlight two. The first is administrative support from HR will allow the mentorship program to focus on the broader strategy of workforce equity and career development that you can get from having mentorship citywide. And the second is data. We need data to determine the program's effectiveness, the participant satisfaction, and iterative process for improvement. The current circumstances, all of the data is independent in different departmental programs, so there's no central database for tracking benchmark data. And each department would really benefit from program support administratively as well, so that you could also align citywide and customize to what the department needs. Finally, I believe establishing mentorship for city employees will provide the foundation for mentorship to continue to grow in the community and throughout the city as well. By providing leadership support and more opportunities for mentorship, by aligning citywide, and by collaborating across departments, there's a real opportunity for the city of Seattle to be on the forefront of mentorship in public service. Thank you. Any questions?
I'd like to reclaim my position as questioner number one, please. Jamie, I'm so excited about your body of work. The quick question I'll have is, the citywide mentoring framework, did you come up with any ideas on which one of the departments, how that may look like, may take the lead on something like that? I'm thinking parks, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm going to show you where I'm sort of heading, but did you come up with some independent ideas on that, or just the framework itself?
Yeah, so the citywide framework, I think the goal is to have a policy that could be used within departments, but be very adaptable to the department, right? Because the departments are so different from one another. So part of what my role is as a fellow has been to kind of craft a policy alongside Sandra that could be utilized across departments, but could also be adopted and specific to each department. And I do think Parks, because it does have it's going to have the citywide mentorship program that Ramel will be launching. There is a real opportunity for collaboration on what that might look like and how they might work together. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, Parks, you're right. That's the correct answer.
I'm looking over at IP. I don't care about IP today. I'm moving forward with another quick question. You have 10 mentors, 10 mentees, let's say, for example. One of the things that always concerns me is I need to know how to be a mentor. Am I saying the same things as AP being a mentor? Should there be a common curriculum, if you will, or do you let everyone mentor to a different style? What's your thoughts on how one mentors?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a both and. It is important to provide some basic training on what does it look like to be a mentor, what are the skills that you might want to develop to be a mentor, because I do think some people expect mentors going to come in and provide a bunch of advice, or that I'm going to instill a bunch of knowledge and skills onto you. But I think the definition has really evolved to be, I'm going to do a lot of listening. I'm going to be the presence you need as you come to the conclusions and answers yourselves. So I do think it's important that people recognize what does my role look like in being a mentor to another person. But I will say that there are so many different ways that can look. There's so many different personalities that can be fantastic mentors. There's no one particular way you have to be. So I would say, yes, we do need some training, and yes, we want to have all sorts of personalities actively involved in what mentorship looks like. And I believe, and I know that workforce development believes that reverse mentoring is such a big part of the process. So much of what a mentor gains, not only from the experience of developing leadership skills, but also what can I learn from this mentee that I'm walking alongside through the process as well.
Thanks, Janie. I'm sorry, for the sake of time, I'm going to try to scoot us out here as quickly as we can. And our next two presentations from our fellows are recorded online. So first up, we have Justin England from Seattle Department of Transportation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justin England. I am a Master of Public Administration student at the University of Southern California, and I've had the pleasure of returning to Seattle for the summer to work as the Mayor's Public Policy Fellow on green fleets at the Seattle Department of Transportation. I'm super excited to share some of my findings with you today, so let's get into it. When I heard that I was going to be the Green Fleets Fellow at SDOT, I thought I was going to spend the entire summer talking about electric vehicles. And while I did spend a good chunk of time on EVs, I soon discovered that there was a more impactful, quicker, cheaper, and easier investment that we could make to truly advance fleet sustainability at the city. The city needs to switch from biodiesel to renewable diesel. Although switching from one type of diesel to another might not necessarily be as enticing as a shiny new electric vehicle, it is the most sensible and immediate decision that the city should make around fleet sustainability. Biodiesel is made through a process that converts animal fats and plant oils into fuel. Seattle's colder climate necessitates a blend of biodiesel that includes a fossil fuel-based diesel. While biodiesel is a more sustainable fuel compared to traditional fossil fuels, renewable diesels provide an even more sustainable and resilient alternative. Renewable diesels are made through any of a variety of methods that create a fuel chemically identical to diesel, allowing it to serve as a drop-in alternative to traditional fuels. The city's contracted supplier, which is based in Washington, manufactures a blend of 10% biodiesel and 90% renewable diesel sourced from animal fats and grain byproduct. So what specifically makes renewable diesels a compelling option for the city? Our renewable diesel emits 17.7% fewer greenhouse gases per gallon than biodiesel. The city uses approximately 1 million gallons of gasoline and biodiesel each per year. So using this figure, we can estimate that transitioning from biodiesel to renewables would reduce citywide diesel-generated emissions by over 1,700 metric tons per year. The transition to renewable diesel would be simple as well. It's chemically identical to diesel, so the city wouldn't need specialized equipment to facilitate the change. And we've used renewable diesel before. Between October 2019 and April 2020, SDOT used over 60,000 gallons of it. And we only stopped using renewable diesel because it was a cost-saving measure when the pandemic hit. We also have an active contract for renewable diesel that we just aren't currently using. So pursuing this option requires minimal staff intervention, and FAS is prepared to implement it if green-lighted. Renewable diesel costs on average 30 to 50 cents more per gallon than biodiesel. And as I mentioned, we use approximately 1 million gallons of gasoline and biodiesel each per year. Therefore, this transition would require a citywide investment of an additional $500,000 annually. But given that our expenses on unleaded gasoline are projected to be practically nothing by 2030, this funding could be maintained and repurposed for renewable diesels or other fleet sustainability projects. Compared to fleet electrification, renewable diesels are a more cost-effective approach. I've included a chart here that compares investment in renewables to SDOT's most impactful EV pilot program. Street sweepers are the Department of Transportation's second dirtiest vehicle, emitting 220 tons of greenhouse gases per year. A citywide transition to renewable diesel would result in an emissions reduction of 1,741 tons. Over a 10-year period, sweeper electrification would cost $8 million compared to the $5 million needed for renewable diesel. So on a per dollar basis, investing in renewable diesel is over 12 times as impactful as some of our most promising EV pilots. So with that being said, the next steps are simple. There's broad support for renewable diesel throughout the city, and it's the quickest and easiest decision we can make to truly advance fleet sustainability and make progress on the climate goals we all agree are urgent. The city needs to identify funding options for renewable diesel, which includes developing a plan to repurpose the money that FAS customer departments are currently spending on unleaded gasoline. From there, it's a matter of working with FAS to facilitate a smooth transition back to renewable diesel, which they're already prepared to do. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer questions or discuss my findings. Thank you so much for your time.
If you have any questions, feel free to email them to me and I'll get that to Justin, okay? Next up, we have our fellow from the Office of Sustainability and Environment, Neha Chinwala.
Hi, my name is Neha Chinwala, and this past summer I was the Mayor's Fellow for the Office of Sustainability and Environment, supporting their communications work. And I'm also a Master of Urban Planning student at the University of Washington, and I use she, her pronouns. Today I'm going to walk you through some of the work that I did this summer. So for background, as climate change continues to become more and more urgent for the city to address, the city's climate work is growing and expanding. OSC has many program areas which all need communication support, and this past summer there were also several new climate and sustainability initiatives that were either launching or underway. But OSC only has one full-time communication staff member who handles everything from social media to design to media engagement, and so it was really important as the fellow to step in and help where I could. The objective of this fellowship was to support communications campaigns for OSC's climate initiatives, while also developing expertise in environmental policy areas through a communications lens. As you can see here, through the communications work, I was able to dive into various subject matter areas, from buildings to transportation to food access and urban forestry. The first big body of work that I did this summer was content creation and policy support. So on my second day of work, I had the opportunity to attend a press conference to launch the Building Emissions Performance Standard, which is the new building policy that OSC helped launch. And I also got to work with partner organizations in the labor and affordable housing space to draft an op-ed that we're hoping to place in the future. I also got to attend the Downtown Activation Plan launch, and after the event, I wrote a blog on OSC Green Space and wrote social media content to highlight the climate and environmental components of the city's Downtown Activation Plan. I also helped draft some messaging around extreme heat and climate response, as well as quotes on behalf of the mayor. The second body of work that I helped with was strategic communications. So every day there's a communication strategy meeting where the OSC leadership is convened to talk about what is happening on a given day across a certain subject matter. And as the fellow, I was put to help manage these meetings by setting the agenda, making sure the right people were in the room, following up on action items and decisions, and overall trying to make these meetings more effective by sending look-aheads and making sure people were prepared for each meeting. The director has said that this is one of the most helpful meetings she attends, so it was really important to make sure that this time was spent very effectively. I also helped coordinate with our consultant, Pyramid Communications, who was brought on to update content for several initiatives, including the One Seattle Climate Justice Agenda, where we're creating a 2-pager and graphics, as well as other projects such as Green New Deal support, the Building Emissions Performance Standard support, and a messaging framework for OSC broadly to use. And you can see on the right there some sticky notes from a messaging workshop we had with Pyramid Communications and the OSC team. And lastly, OSC doesn't have a graphic designer, and this is an area where they need more support. So I was able to step in through multiple subject areas and across different platforms to help create design. The first thing I worked on was environmental justice and food grant opportunities, and these graphics were used across social media, our newsletter, and sent to partners to help get the word out. And more recently, I helped with the materials for the heavy-duty truck electrification incentive pilot. So this included a 2-pager, a program guide, and an interest form, all 3 which were translated into 3 different languages and then put back into these designs. And lastly, I supported the food team by helping highlight the investments made from the sweetened beverage tax in 2022 by designing their annual report. And my key takeaways from this fellowship is that communications is critical for city government to directly engage in conversations with community members. The city is sometimes offering direct services such as safe places to shelter during extreme heat or those environmental justice grants that I mentioned. And if we're not reaching people, then they won't know about these resources. And it's really important to use communications as a tool to help connect with people and help them get the help that they need. It's also important to have accessible communications to help get that word out. And mostly I learned that all project work touches communications, and it's important to work across departments because that's what strengthens everyone's impact and helps us help the residents of Seattle. And finally, for my recommendations, I first of all think that communications teams and investments should be expanded, especially at OSC where capacity is a constraint, but our work is continuing to grow. It's also important in the interim to help train people who are not in traditional communications roles to see themselves as comms people to approach their work with communications in mind. And lastly, to consider accessibility and equity in all city communications to empower people to feel comfortable as communicators and also to make sure messaging resonates with community. Thank you to the mayor, the fellowship organizers, and everyone for listening and for the opportunity to be a fellow this past summer. I truly enjoyed working for the city and will carry this with me through my last year of grad school and into my career. Thank you.
You have nothing more important than to be here right now. I'm a busy person too, but this is the most important part of my day. I mean that. I think I experienced something that inspired me. You know, I was going to say I don't BS a lot. I do BS a lot sometimes. Sometimes I already speak from the heart. I'm inspired. Thank you. I want to thank the fellows for their thoughtful recommendations. I'm going to mention a few names just because when I thought about, let me look at my notes. Katrina, when I thought about you sharing with us I'll call it the burnout, the vicarious trauma. Where's Katrina? Thank you. I thought about that in that body of work, then I thought about that in all assets. My job, for example. That's why I thought about what inspires me. I'm inspired now. I'm inspired when I see people that realize that this journey we're on, there's often just the victory line moves. It's very evasive, sometimes out of our grasp. And I asked the fellows to believe that I once heard a quote, I'll probably slaughter it a little bit, but it says something like, nothing worth really achieving will be achieved within our lifetime. And so you're saved by hope. And that hope is that you truly make a difference. Fighting racism, fighting genderism, fighting sexism, fighting for climate change. We may not win within our lifetime, but we're saved by hope that we will make an impact. That's the inspiration for me. So I want to thank all of you for putting in the work. I learned a term from I think it was Jamie, might have been Allison, might have been Elena. Reverse mentoring, who said that? Okay. That I never thought about that. That as we continue to learn, you asked the question about who do you think of as mentors? And I think about many of the mentors. Many of them did not look like me, weren't even my gender, but mentors. I continue to be mentored. Some of the greatest minds, the greatest thinkers continue to have mentors, and you continue to be a mentee. It's a two-way street, and so I love your concept there that we continue to learn. I want to thank the planning team that's here. Just raise your hand if you're part of it. The director heads, planning team. Is anyone here? Yeah, thank you. Is Director Spot still here? He might have left early. Let's talk badly about him since he left early. No, let's not do that. Greg shared with me that he started under Mayor Villaraigosa down in LA as a mayoral fellow. And now he's a department head in one of our most important departments, Seattle Department of Transportation. So I hope, again, that you all learn something as fellows. I am proud when it says Mayor's Fellows. That's why I ask so many questions, because I'm prideful of the quality that we saw. You've heard a lot of cliches about how it takes a village to raise a child and all blah, 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 blah. All these cliches, sometimes they're cliches because they're so true that we're in this together. There's nothing fair about politics. There's nothing fair about public service. You take your hits. And again, I hope amongst your own group you found some fellowship, some camaraderie, some love, some kindness within, because for me, that's what keeps me going. And so I think where's Sandra? I can't see where she is. Oh, I think this program was a success no matter how you describe it. No matter how you describe it. So I close by saying that you've inspired us as public servants, the new lifeblood coming into this. So I hope that many of you turn down the world of big bucks and realize the joy of public service, and you seek refuge and strength in those around you. We have so much work to do in this country. I had lunch, my days turned into, was it this week? I had lunch with a cabinet member, Marcia Fudge, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And I asked her, she'll openly talk about her age, so I'm not saying any secrets, she's 70. And I said, well, what continues to inspire you? And this is a woman that was in Congress, was a mayor, was in Congress, was chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, who was held a lot of, and she reports to Biden now. And she talked about meeting folks like you that are coming with new ideas, that are living with the contradictions we see, that continue to have that energy, that fervor, that commitment. So thank you. You've blessed us with your work, and we'll be better for it. So thank you. It's been a huge success. IP, you're on my hit list. No. Would I really like, no, I'm serious now, I'm playing. Come on, I'm playing. What I really like is it one of my favorite departments, the humor that you brought, because I laugh a lot. Because do you really want to hear about all the pain I've had in my life? I don't want you to hear about that. I want you to hear about the joy. I love it when people razz me a little bit. People want to know why I joke a lot, because that's sustainable for me. Humor, love, commitment, it has to be to do this kind of work. So if I bless you with one thought, that is, take things very, very seriously, but not too seriously, because this work we're going to do, that finish line is evasive. I love humor. That's sort of my religion. And if I ever offend anyone, it's not, I never try to offend anyone. I've been hurt in my own life too much to ever hurt anyone with words. So I love it. I love what I saw today. You've made me happy. I love it, what I see. So today you just made my day, and I'm going to ride it all the way to Labor Day. So thank you very much. One Seattle.